Welcome to Key into Quality. Hello to all our quality-minded listeners, and a special shout out to our Mayo Clinic Care Network members. I'm Dr. Tim Morgenthaler, a professor of medicine and a vice chair of quality at Mayo Clinic. We have a remarkable guest joining us today, an expert in medical radiation safety. Co-hosting today's conversation is Sherry. Sherry?
Welcome, everyone. I'm Sherry Nemec, Consultation and Relationship Manager for Quality at Mayo Clinic. And yeah, Dr. Morgenthaler, today we're going to take a little bit different look at safety than we've looked at before. So it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, of course, we're talking about patient safety often, but you can't have patient safety if the staff aren't safe. And we believe in safety without adjectives at Mayo Clinic. And
That's
so
right.
that's what we're going to talk, and hopefully not in too glowing of terms. Sorry for the pun,
Mhm.
talking about
Oh,
radiation
oh,
safety. Sorry. But no, couldn't resist. But let's rewind a bit. I always get interested in the history of how these things come about. So I just want you to imagine for a second that it's 1895. So we have rolled it back a
we are
ways.
going way back.
Okay, so this guy, Wilhelm Conrad Renton, he's in his lab. He's experimenting with a cathode ray tube. And although it wasn't his original intention, his work leads to the discovery of X rays, which open up a whole new world in medical imaging. This breakthrough really allowed physicians to see for the first time inside the human body without dissection. And it totally revolutionized medicine. Within 1 month of the discovery, radiographs were already being created in both the United States and Europe. That was pretty quick
Wow.
for 1895. They didn't have Twitter. Okay.
Right.
Just 6 months later, they're being used on the front lines of battlefields to locate bullets in wounded soldiers. And then close on its heels were the discoveries of radioactivity by Henri Becquerel and Madame Curie and her husband, adding even more tools and, it turns out, challenges to the medical toolkit. I mean, this was very rapid progress. And as often happens in science, the progress got a little ahead of the safety. So the discovery of the X-rays and the radioactivity in that time period brought all these remarkable advancements, but they also led to unanticipated injuries. And the harmful effects of radiation were really not initially understood. I mean, they were using it very casually to treat everything and enhance beauty and all the things you might think of. The early experiments with X rays caused eye irritations, loss of limbs in some cases, fatalities, cancers, and even amongst pretty knowledgeable pioneers like Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. So this brings us to our current time and our current guest. With the advancement of all these powerful technologies, which, if you just think for a minute, what would healthcare be like without radiation as a diagnostic tool and as a treatment tool? I mean,
Can't even
there's a lot
imagine.
missing. I know.
Mm.
So the need for safety and regulation has become paramount. Our guest today is at the forefront of ensuring that radiation is used safely and effectively in medical settings. Let's dive in. You ready, Sherry?
I'm ready.
So please join me in welcoming our expert on medical radiation safety, Glenn M. Sturchio, Ph.D., Director of Health Physics and the Chair of Mayo Clinic's Radiation Safety Executive Steering Committee. Welcome, Glenn.
Well, thanks for
Tell,
having me. I'm looking forward to discussing radiation safety.
yeah, I know. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you get into the field of radiation safety and find your way to Mayo Clinic?
Well, my undergraduate degree is in environmental science from Rutgers University, where I did mostly air and water pollution sciences. So I graduated, needed a job, and there was a company, Hoffman LaRoche, needed somebody that could do air and water sampling for radioactivity. So I joined one of their subsidiaries, Physics, which was radiopharmaceutical production. And in about the first week of my job, the RSO there, radiation safety officer, told me about a master's degree program at Rutgers in radiation science, and they had 2 jobs for every graduate. So the
Whoa.
next week, I went down and talked to the advisor. And that fall, I started taking classes. Once I had my master's degree, I got to be a professional, right? A health physicist. I went to the University of California, Davis, was able to work there in veterinary medicine teaching hospital. So I got a lot
Oh,
of exposure on the use of radiation in veterinary medicine. So I was responsible for their radiation safety program and all their X-ray equipment and things like that. I always said it was very useful because at one time I accidentally ran over my dog. So I put him in the car and drove him over to the vet med teaching hospital. And since I knew all the radiologists, it was easy to get him in and looked at. He was fine.
Oh,
So
good.
I
yay.
was scared, but he was fine. Having grown up in New Jersey, I went from the East Coast to the West Coast. There was an opening at Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, which is the home of the laser, the home of the transistor, and all those things. And having grown up in New Jersey in that area, it was sort of like the big building on the mount. So I got a job there and did radiation safety at Bell Labs for a few years. And what I found out, mostly it was equipment based radiation safety, so like X ray equipment, accelerators, but no one spills X-ray equipment, right? So you don't have these spills and you don't have these, middle of the night calls that somebody in a lab spilled something. So it got pretty boring. So I then went from there to Merck, which was just down the road, which was, biomedical research, drug development, where they had all kinds of uses of radioactivity in animal models and just the chemistry of labeling drugs to put into, clinical trials. So that was a very good experience. I was the radiation safety officer there. I was there for 12 years. I had now done, university health physics. I had done manufacturing health physics. I had done biomedical research health physics. I had never done healthcare. And there was an opening at Mayo Clinic. So I decided to move my family once again almost across the country from New Jersey to Rochester, Minnesota, where I did 13 winters before I transferred down to Jacksonville. So that is how I got to Mayo Clinic, and that's sort of my academically, and then then professionally, I've done a lot of things in the Health Physics Society, which is the Radiation Safety Society. I was the National Council on Radiation Protection, which is congressionally chartered. I was a member of the NCRP Council for 6 years. Do a lot of work still with them on some of their committees, and also I'm active in the American Academy of Health Physics. So I
Well,
try to stay
wow.
a little bit active
We're
professionally.
we're going to express gratitude for
Mhm.
your Rolling Stone nature. I mean, you really
That's
moved
it.
through it all. That's wonderful. So we're benefiting from a wealth of experience.
So let's talk about your time now and leading this work at Mayo Clinic. What is the main mission of radiation safety within Mayo Clinic?
Well, I mean, the main mission is, right, we want to make sure that people are safe, right? The patients are safe, the public, families, staff are all safe. So that's our main mission. We want to ensure we're compliant with regulations. I always think if we're doing things properly and safely, we should be compliant. Sometimes we're not. And what we do in cases like that, we go to talk to the regulators about how we're doing a good job and your regulation is requiring us to do something that really doesn't make sense in our workplace. And we try to work with them on that. I mean, to me, I see that as that's how radiation safety supports, Mayo Clinic, the needs of the patient. If physicians weren't safe, if allied health staff weren't safe, right, how do they provide care to the patient? So I always come back to that whenever we're having some difficulties in radiation safety, right? I always try to refocus people on, yeah, that's going to be problematic to try to do. But if it was your mom or your dad that the physicians were trying to help, you'd be more than happy to come in late or show up early.
Right.
So that's what we do. And that's the other thing I think where we add the value. We know the regulatory rule book, right?
Yeah.
Physicians know what to do medically. We know what the regulatory rule book is. So we work really closely with nuclear medicine, radiology, radiation oncology to help deliver the care to the patients that the patients need while staying safe and compliant. And there are cases where we have to go to the regulators and ask for variances in order to let that delivery happen safe, compliant, and in a workflow that makes sense for the patients and the staff.
Glenn, I just love what you're describing there, which is this partnership between you as a radiation safety specialist in all things radiation safety and regulatory,
Mhm.
and then the practice. You were just kind of starting to say, there are some times where you have to kind of go and ask for a variance. I don't know. Can you give us some examples of where you collaborated with specific departments on cases, not sharing PHI, just
Right.
cases?
Probably the oldest variance we have and still have. In one of the states, there's a requirement that anyone in an X-ray procedure room where they're using fluoroscopy must wear a lead apron. And we have in cardiology, heart rhythm services have these very long, in other areas, have these very long procedures, but particularly heart rhythm services, where right before that regulation was implemented, we had set the room up with barriers between the staff that were sitting at instrumentation observing the heart rates and all that, and the physician at the table with the patient. And then this new regulation comes out that says all these people that are sitting behind protective shielding need to wear aprons, right? Because
Mm,
you must wear an apron because got no credit for the whole body
the
barrier.
shielding.
Right. So we basically had to get a variance from the state that said, notwithstanding that requirement to wear an apron, we don't have to wear aprons if they're sitting behind those whole body barriers.
Hmm.
So that's an example. And a more recent example along the same lines, again in cardiology, the state has a requirement that all aprons must be 0.5 millimeter lead equivalent, which tend to become very heavy if you're wearing them 8 hours a day. So some of our providers and some of our allied health staff were interested in going to lighter lead aprons. So radiation safety, we took the last full year of radiation safety data of dosimetry badge data, actual readings on people, and we looked at it if they were wearing 0.5 millimeter lead aprons, and then we looked at it if we reduced that to 0.25 millimeter lead aprons, and we showed that in both cases, staff were protected and were well below the regulatory limits.
Mm.
So we've asked for a variance to allow the staff to make their own decision on the level of radiation safety, the right reduction they want versus the amount of weight they want to carry. Because anecdotally, there are a number of muscular skeletal
I,
injury happening wearing lead
yeah,
aprons all day.
I distinctly remember one of my colleagues that was a interventional cardiologist who really developed some significant arthritis type problems
Mhm.
and back problems just from standing all day with a heavy apron on. So
Right.
I'll bet that had something to do with the progress of this work. And
Yeah,
nice.
I mean, that's it. So we said to the state, they're adults. They have safe options. Let them pick. Let them do that weighing of musculoskeletal risk against radiation risk. So we have gotten that variance. So we are slowly rolling out that to our cardiology group.
I'm going to take a little turn here for a second because
Hmm.
we've so far been talking about radiation exposure mostly as a result of equipment that
Hmm.
people are using, X-rays and so forth. But I remember some prior patient safety concerns that ended up being staff safety concerns, and it had to do with patients who were receiving. I think it might have been like radioactive thyroid or
Hmm.
something that ended up in the urine, and then you had to worry about how to handle the urine afterwards and so forth. Tell us a little bit more about other areas that you have to kind of perform education and procedural design and things like that, because I'm not sure all of our listeners understand just how complicated this can get.
Exactly. My next example was going to be theranostics or radiopharmaceutical therapy because
Ah,
we're up to our elbows in that one. So radiopharmaceutical therapy is basically when they administer radioactive material and it concentrates in the cancerous tumor and then irradiates the tumor cells and kills the tumor cells. That's the therapeutic effect to kill the cancer. Since it's injected, there's biological elimination. And for radioiodine therapy, which is probably the granddaddy of all radiation therapies, not only does radioiodine come out in the urine, it comes out in the saliva and the sweat. So when we're
oh,
doing radioactive therapy with radioiodine, if the patient is going to be inpatient, and that's the thing with radiopharmaceutical therapies where we get involved, there's a decision has to be made. Is it going to be an inpatient procedure or outpatient? And there are certain criteria in the regulations. If the patient can meet certain criteria, they can be released and go home and spend their isolation period at home. But if they can't, they spend their isolation period in the hospital. And if they're in the hospital, what we do is we prepare the room by the TV remote control is wrapped in plastic. Otherwise, it'll become
mm,
contaminated. Things
mm,
like that. We paper the bathroom. So we try to do all kinds of things to minimize contamination in the hospital. And then when the patient's released after a few days, we have to go, radiation safety goes in and surveys to see if there's contamination and then decontaminates the room as necessary so that we get it down to a level where it can be released for the next patient whether they're radioactive or not. So we
Boy,
have to
boy.
clean it up to that level.
Yeah, you see, these are the things that you just never think of. I
I had no idea.
remember a case where somebody was given their radioactive therapy. The intention was they were going to go home, and then they actually had some medical problem that required them to
Hmm.
return to the emergency department. And I don't remember what our solution to that was, but somehow the emergency department had to be notified
Hmm.
and made ready and so forth. So involved.
Yep,
I'll bet you've
that's
helped us with a bunch of those.
with the explosion in radiopharmaceutical therapeutic treatments with theranostics. So now there are new agents. There's the lutetium-177 based agents. Lutathera is used for endocrine tumors. Pluvicto is used for prostate. The amount of radiopharmaceutical therapies we're now doing in Rochester has probably tripled in the last 2 years, and maybe even higher than that. I have the numbers somewhere. So we're starting to see a lot more radioactive patients. And what we're starting to see is their acuity, their disease is further along. So now and then we're starting to see more of them come back to the ED after the administration of their treatment,
Mm.
where they've been released because with this is getting into the weeds, but I will because what the heck? Lutetium 170, it's less radioactive than radioiodine. So it doesn't really present any type of external hazard. So when I get the therapy, when I'm done getting my administration, my radiation level coming off of me isn't that high compared to radioiodine. So typically, these patients can be released to go home and isolate at home for a little bit because their urine is still radioactive. So we want them to spend like a couple of days at home and use their bathroom, do good hygiene at home to minimize any radiation exposure to others. But what'll happen is some of these patients then have a medical event at night and have to come back to the ED. So we have developed a procedure so that the ED will be aware that they're radioactive patients, and this flag is on for, I think, 4 days post administration. So if they come in within 4 days, the ED understands that they're radioactive and their urine may be radioactive, and to take precautions if they have some kind of incontinence event. That's really what we're concerned about for radiation safety, because if they just follow the standard precautions of wearing gloves and things like that, they really aren't at risk of getting a radiation exposure. But if there is a incontinence,
A
then we want
spillage
to
or something.
control, yeah, spillage of some kind of urine, we want to control that. So that's what we've done, and we're working, getting out more and more training on those things, and trying to work with the groups on that.
Glenn,
That
I know this isn't exactly on topic, but you've kind of piqued my curiosity. So this gentleman who gets the new therapy and is sent home and use your own bathroom
mhm.
and stay safe. What are the instructions for family members under those circumstances? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, that's a great question, because I skipped right over that. The patients, before they're released to go home, they do get instructions. So the instructions are to maximize distance from family members for 2 days, like be greater than 3 feet away, minimize contact with children at that time to minimize their radiation exposure. But usually these kind of instructions are only for a couple of days. For men, the instruction is to sit down when you pee, which is it's a radiation safety technical term. I don't know what the medical term is, but so things like that. We also double flush the toilet. If you do laundry, do your laundry separately and then run it twice, type of things. Simple things like that. I will tell you, there's been a ton of literature looking at radioiodine patients because, again, this was radioiodine therapy, I think, started in the 50s, if not
Yep.
earlier, where they've actually put radiation dosimeters on family members with patients and gone into houses and measured contamination. They've never seen significant radiation exposures of family members or pets, and they haven't seen really significant contamination of households. So, with radioiodine, which is much more likely to spread contamination because it's in the sweat and the saliva. They haven't seen that as a risk if the patients follow the instructions they're given. So I would expect the same thing with Lutathera and Pluvecto.
That's all so interesting. I really had no idea that you could actually transfer
Mhm.
that to other people. It's or get other people exposed. So, what's on the horizon for radiation safety? What are you looking forward to with the trends in your field?
Well, the one thing that we're looking forward to, and I think all Mayo Clinic is, down in Jacksonville, the proton beam is coming up next year. And I believe the year after that is when carbon ion will come on. And it's going to be the first carbon ion therapy in the United States. So again, it's another Mayo Clinic first and it's a US first. So we're pretty excited about that. The amount of concrete, we went over and looked at the building right now. I mean, some of these concrete walls that are used for shielding are 7 feet thick.
Oh
So
my gosh.
it's an impressive building. That's one of the things we're looking for. Another thing that's much simpler but geeky exciting for us is we're updating our instrument calibration process and application so that we can start predicting failures of detectors before we redeploy them and then they fail in the field. That's something we're working on internally because now radiation safety is an enterprise, right, service line. So we'll get meters in from Mayo Clinic Health Systems. So we may have a meter that comes into Rochester for calibration. We send back out to Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And if we send that back out to them, and we could have known that it's going to fail in the next 12 months, right? It would have been better if we just changed the failing detector now before we send it to them. It fails. They
Mm.
have to send it back and forth. So we're looking at those things. Another thing is, and this is the ongoing challenge, is the theranostics with that. And theranostics, I keep saying the word, basically what it is, and this is the exciting stuff in the last couple of years in nuclear medicine. What they can do now is they will take a pharmaceutical, right? Some molecule that's the agent of interest, and they first will label it with a short half-life radioactive material, and then they can inject that in the person and see that it actually goes to the tumor and how much of it goes to the tumor. But since it's a very short half-life, right, they image it. And then now they know this is what the uptake's going to be to this tumor. This is what the uptake's going to be to these organs. They can personalize the radiation dose if necessary. And then they'll take that same molecule and label a longer lived, more energetic radioactive material. And then they'll inject that into the person. And then when that gets taken up to the tumor, it will irradiate the tumor and kill the tumor. So it's diagnostics first, then therapy, but they use theranostics because I guess it sounded better for marketing. I have no idea.
Yeah,
There's
sounds great.
some
I'm just
focus
Sounds
group, some
but
focus group.
really, I mean, it's fascinating now how,
Absolutely.
you can get so much more information about which organs are going to be affected,
Hmm.
affected which ways individually, rather than just kind of
Yeah.
here's the 95% confidence level that we're going to do something good more than we're going to do something bad. So
I
that's
Right.
just
really
Yeah.
have to
amazing.
add, Dr. Morgenthaler really likes geeky, exciting
Hmm.
stuff.
I do.
So
Well,
you're
You
on the
started.
money.
In fact, I was just thinking when you were talking, Glenn, you said this is an enterprise activity.
hmm
Now, our listeners may or may not, that's kind of lingo at Mayo Clinic. All of our healthcare facilities are connected. We work together.
hmm
When he says a shared service, what you're really saying is that that service can serve all of our Mayo Clinic
hmm
locations. I was just thinking through this rather technical field. I mean, if you're an independent hospital someplace, you would have to be relying probably on some close partner to perform one or more aspects of all of these things. How does that work? Does this kind of treatment and program really get confined to larger hospitals and healthcare systems?
Some of it is definitely larger hospitals and healthcare systems. I think, I mean, that's the beauty of working at Mayo Clinic, right? Is it's in our blood to be collaborative. So that comes second nature. And also, because we're enterprise, the radiation safety team, we have people supporting in Arizona, in Florida, in Rochester. We have one FTE dedicated to the health systems, but we all work together. So we have modality teams like nuclear medicine team is somebody from Rochester, somebody from Florida, Arizona, and the health systems. So if an issue comes up in one of them, we can discuss it and say, "Oh, are you having the same issue? And if not, be on the lookout for it."
Yeah.
And then we come up with one solution that works across the enterprise instead of four solutions. And before radiation safety became enterprise, we used to have 3 or 4 different solutions at Mayo Clinic. So now we come up with one, we get the best of them all and generate one. What's interesting is we have had a couple of times where members of the care network have reached out and radiation safety has dealt with them. I guess there was a radiation oncology practice up in Wyoming that had some questions on regulatory compliance and licensing. So we met with them for an hour and just chatted through some issues. And there's been some laser safety questions that have come up and laser safety program questions that we've dealt with.
Yeah, you're a huge resource, I'm sure, for many people. Well, wow, Sherry, do you have any additional questions for
I
Glenn?
don't. This has been just so interesting.
Glenn, any other comments that you want to share with our listeners about this area of your work, you and your team's work?
I'm biased. I think we have a great radiation safety team at Mayo Clinic. We have a couple of 100 years of experience in medical. That is, no, I don't think any other single organization really has that much radiation safety experience in their programs. And I think it's a great place to work. And I don't
We
only work at
agree.
Mayo Clinic, I'm a patient at Mayo Clinic. So
Aren't we all? So,
aren't we all?
Yes.
well, really, I just want to express our gratitude for your time and your sharing your wisdom and
Mhm.
your history and all the things that you have here. We do have to end our podcast, and we've come to the end. So we're really glad all of our listeners could join us. We hope the information provided is insightful and valuable. Again, Mayo Clinic's Key into Quality podcast aims to highlight some first steps in addressing important quality challenges in your organization. Our goal is to improve quality for patients and the populations that we all serve. If you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be grateful if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts, a rating on Spotify, or feedback wherever it is that you listen. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Please let others in your organization know about the podcast so the information can be spread. Until next time, goodbye.